The morning my life became a bureaucratic nightmare started with 8 inches of fresh snow and a knock on my door at 6:30 in the morning. I stumbled to the front door of my townhouse in Maple Ridge, Connecticut, still in my thermal pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt. Through the frosted glass, I could make out the silhouette of someone standing ramrod straight on my porch, clipboard in hand. Already, warning bells were going off in my head. When I opened the door, cold air blasted into my face along with the pinched expression of a woman who looked like she had been sucking on lemons since dawn. She was maybe 50, with shoulder-length blonde hair that had been teased and sprayed into submission, wearing a puffy white coat that made her look like an overstuffed marshmallow. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Mr. Cameron Peters?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer and was displeased about it. "That's me," I said, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Can I help you?" "I'm Sharon Whitmore, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your flagrant violation of community noise ordinances." I blinked at her, my brain still trying to boot up. "Noise ordinances. It's 6:30 in the morning. I've been asleep." Sharon's nostrils flared like she had just caught a whiff of something rotten. "Not now." "Yesterday evening at precisely 5:45 p.m. you were operating heavy machinery in direct violation of HOA Regulation 7-4-C, which clearly states that motorized lawn equipment and snow removal devices may only be operated between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays." The fog in my brain cleared enough for me to understand what she was talking about. "You mean my snowblower? I was clearing my driveway after work." "At 5:45 p.m., she repeated, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "That is a 45-minute violation of community standards. Additionally, multiple residents have complained about the excessive noise level of your particular device." I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the cold seeping through my clothes but too stunned to care. "Madam, I work until 5. I'm a U.S. federal marshal. I can't exactly leave my post to come home and snowblow my driveway during approved hours." Sharon's expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened further. "Your employment situation is not the concern of the HOA. Rules apply to all residents equally, Mr. Peters. No exceptions." "So what am I supposed to do? Leave my driveway covered in snow? You could hire a service that operates during approved hours, or you could take personal time from your employment. Again, not the HOA's concern." She flipped through pages on her clipboard with sharp, aggressive movements. "As this is your first written violation, you'll receive a warning and a fine of $250. If there are subsequent violations, the fines will increase exponentially, and we will be forced to take more serious action." The absurdity of the situation was starting to pierce through my morning grogginess. More serious action? Like what? Confiscation of the offending equipment, liens against your property, and potential legal action. She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was reading off a grocery list rather than threatening to seize my property. I straightened up, my Marshal training kicking in. I knew how to deal with people who thought a little authority meant they could push others around. "Let me get this straight. You want to fine me for clearing my driveway so I can get to work, where I serve federal warrants and transport federal prisoners, because I did it 45 minutes past your arbitrary cutoff time. The time is not arbitrary. It was voted on and approved by the HOA board in 2019. The meeting minutes are available on our website." Sharon pulled a piece of paper from her clipboard and thrust it at me. "Here is your formal notice of violation. Payment is due within 30 days. Future violations will not be tolerated." I took the paper, scanning it quickly. It was printed on official-looking letterhead with the Maple Ridge HOA logo, complete with legal language that would make a lawyer proud. At the bottom was a schedule of escalating fines and penalties that seemed designed to financially destroy anyone who dared to clear snow at an unapproved hour. "This is insane," I muttered. "This is community living, Mr. Peters. When you purchased your home here, you agreed to abide by all HOA rules and regulations. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the complete covenant document. It's available on our website as a downloadable PDF. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back down my front steps, her boots crunching through the snow I had cleared just hours earlier. I watched her climb into a white Lexus SUV that probably cost more than my annual salary and drive away. I closed the door and looked down at the violation notice in my hand. $250 for using my snowblower at the wrong time. It was the kind of petty tyranny that made my blood boil, the same instinct that had driven me to law enforcement in the first place. I had spent the last 8 years as a deputy U.S. Marshal hunting down fugitives, protecting federal judges, and maintaining order in federal courtrooms. I had faced down armed criminals, navigated gang territories, and testified in trials that put dangerous people behind bars. And now, I was being threatened with fines and equipment confiscation because I cleared my driveway at 5:45 instead of 4:45. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, reading through the violation notice in detail. The language was deliberately intimidating, full of whereas clauses and legal terminology that seemed designed to make residents feel powerless. There were references to Connecticut state statutes regarding HOA authority, citations of the original covenant documents, and a breakdown of the penalty structure that would eventually result in foreclosure proceedings if violations continued. My phone buzzed with a text from my partner at the Marshal service, Diego Rodriguez. We had a warrant service scheduled for 9 that morning in Hartford, about 40 minutes away. I texted back confirming I would meet him at the federal courthouse at 8:30. As I got ready for work, my mind kept circling back to Sharon Whitmore and her ridiculous violation notice. Part of me wanted to just pay the fine and move on with my life. $250 was annoying but not financially devastating. But another part of me, the part that had spent years fighting against people who abused authority, bristled at giving in to such obvious overreach. I decided to do some research. After showering and putting on my work clothes, a dark suit with my badge and service weapon concealed beneath my jacket, I pulled up the Maple Ridge HOA website on my laptop. What I found was both impressive and deeply concerning. The website was professional and comprehensive, with sections devoted to architectural guidelines, landscaping requirements, approved exterior paint colors, and dozens of other regulations governing virtually every aspect of life in the community. The noise ordinance Sharon had cited was indeed real, buried in Section 7 of a 70-page covenant document. But as I read through more of the rules, I found other provisions that seemed designed less for community harmony and more for generating revenue and control. There were fines for having garbage cans visible from the street, for parking commercial vehicles in driveways, for holiday decorations displayed outside approved date ranges, and for dozens of other minor infractions. The fine schedule was clearly laid out, starting at $250 for first offenses and escalating to thousands of dollars for repeated violations. And buried in the enforcement section was the provision Sharon had mentioned. After 3 violations, the HOA had the authority to confiscate equipment or property involved in the violation, and place liens on homes for unpaid fines. I was reading through the board meeting minutes when I noticed a pattern. Sharon Whitmore's name appeared over and over, always voting for stricter enforcement, always pushing for higher fines, always advocating for aggressive action against residents who failed to comply with every minute detail of the covenants. In the last year alone, the HOA had issued over 300 violation notices and collected more than $60,000 in fines. That number made me pause. $60,000 from a community of maybe 200 homes. That was a lot of money for what was supposed to be a non-profit organization dedicated to maintaining common areas and community standards. I made a mental note to dig deeper into the HOA's finances when I had time. For now, I had actual criminals to chase. The warrant service went smoothly. Diego and I, along with 2 other deputies, arrested a fugitive who had skipped bail on federal drug charges. The guy tried to run out his back door but found himself facing 2 more deputies who had covered the rear exit. He surrendered without incident, and we had him processed and in custody before noon. "You seem distracted today," Diego said as we drove back to the courthouse. He was a big guy, former college football player who had gone into law enforcement instead of trying for the pros. We had been partners for 3 years and had developed the kind of easy rapport that made the job bearable. I told him about my morning visit from Sharon Whitmore and the HOA violation notice. Diego laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the car. "Man, that's why I rent." HOAs are like little fascist governments. They attract people who couldn't get real power anywhere else, so they get their kicks pushing around their neighbors. $250 for using my snowblower 45 minutes late, I said, shaking my head. And she threatened to confiscate it if I violate the rule again. Can they actually do that? Legally, apparently. The covenant documents give them pretty broad authority, and Connecticut law is surprisingly favorable to HOAs. They can fine, they can lien, and under certain circumstances, they can seize property involved in covenant violations. Diego whistled low. "That's messed up. What are you going to do?" "Not sure yet. Part of me wants to fight it on principle. But that means time and probably lawyer fees, and there's no guarantee I'd win. You could always just use the snowblower whenever you want and dare them to do something about it." I smiled at that. Tempting, but I've got enough problems without adding a property dispute to the list. We pulled into the courthouse parking garage and I pushed thoughts of the HOA out of my mind. I had paperwork to complete, reports to file, and case files to review. The snowblower situation would have to wait, but the situation didn't wait for me. When I got home that evening around 6, there was another notice taped to my front door. This one informed me that I was required to attend a mandatory HOA board meeting the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the Maple Ridge Community Center. My violation would be discussed, and I would have an opportunity to address the board. Failure to attend would result in additional fines and would be noted in my permanent HOA record. I crumpled the notice in my fist, frustration boiling over. A permanent HOA record. Like I was some kind of delinquent student being called before the principal. The next few days were busy at work. We had a high-profile trial starting at the federal courthouse in New Haven, and our office was responsible for courtroom security and witness protection. I spent long hours coordinating with other agencies, reviewing threat assessments, and ensuring that everyone who needed to be in that courtroom got there safely. The snowblower incident faded to the back of my mind. Tuesday evening arrived faster than I wanted. I changed out of my work clothes into jeans and a sweater, though I kept my badge in my pocket. At 6:45, I walked the 2 blocks to the Maple Ridge Community Center, a modern building that served as the hub for HOA meetings and community events. The meeting room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front where the board members sat and rows of folding chairs facing them. About 20 residents were scattered throughout the chairs, most of them looking as thrilled to be there as I was. Sharon Whitmore sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members. 2 men and 2 women, all around the same age, all wearing expressions of stern self-importance. I took a seat in the back row and waited. Sharon called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m., rapping a small gavel on the table. She went through standard opening procedures, approval of previous meeting minutes, and treasurer's report. Then she got to the enforcement report. "We have several violation notices to review this evening," Sharon said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "First is Mr. Cameron Peters of 27 Birchwood Lane. Mr. Peters, are you present?" I raised my hand. "I'm here. Please come forward." I walked to the front of the room, very aware that everyone was watching me. Sharon gestured to a small podium set up to one side of the board table. "Mr. Peters, you were issued a violation notice for operating a snowblower outside approved hours. Do you dispute the facts of the violation?" "No," I said. "I was clearing my driveway after work. I got home around 5:30 and started working around 5:45. And you're aware that the approved hours for motorized equipment end at 5 p.m. I am now, though I wasn't when I bought my house 8 months ago." No one mentioned the noise restrictions during the closing process. Sharon's expression suggested that ignorance of the law was no excuse. All residents are required to familiarize themselves with HOA covenants upon purchase. The covenant document is public record. "It's also 70 pages of dense legal language," I countered. "Most people don't have time to read through all of that." One of the other board members, a balding man with thick glasses, spoke up. "That's not the HOA's problem, Mr. Peters. When you purchased your property, you entered into a legally binding agreement to abide by all community rules. I understand that, but I'm asking for some flexibility here. I work until 5 p.m. I'm a federal law enforcement officer. I can't just leave my job early to clear my driveway. And the alternative is either leaving it covered in snow or hiring a service, which is expensive." Sharon consulted her notes. "The violation stands as written. However, the board is willing to offer you a payment plan for the fine if the full amount presents a financial hardship." "I don't want a payment plan," I said, feeling my frustration rising. "I want common sense. The rule doesn't make sense for people who work normal hours. By the time most people get home from work, it's past 5 p.m. The rule exists to maintain peace and quiet during dinner hours," Sharon said. "Many of our residents have young children or work from home. Excessive noise in the evening disrupts family time and creates an unpleasant environment. I was using the snowblower for maybe 20 minutes, and it was necessary to clear my driveway so I could get to work the next morning." The woman sitting to Sharon's left, a thin redhead with sharp features, leaned forward. "Perhaps you should consider moving to a community without an HOA if you find our rules too restrictive, Mr. Peters." The comment hung in the air like a slap. Several other residents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Are you seriously suggesting I sell my home because I cleared my driveway at the wrong time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm suggesting that if you're unwilling to follow community standards, this might not be the right neighborhood for you." I took a deep breath, counting to 5 in my head. Losing my temper wouldn't help anything. "Look, I'm willing to pay the fine this time." but I'm asking the board to consider revising the noise ordinance to be more realistic for working professionals. Maybe extend the allowed hours until 7 or 8 p.m. That would give people time to get home and take care of their properties without violating the rules. Sharon made a note on her papers. Your suggestion will be taken under advisement. The board will discuss potential covenant revisions at our next quarterly planning meeting in March. In the meantime, the fine stands. You have 30 days to remit payment. If you violate the noise ordinance again before the rules are revised, you will face escalating penalties up to and including equipment confiscation. Do you understand? I understand that you're threatening to steal my property over a minor timing issue, I said. Sharon's face flushed red. The HOA does not steal, Mr. Peters. We enforce the rules that all residents agreed to follow. If you continue with this disrespectful attitude, I'll hold you in contempt and add an additional fine for disrupting HOA proceedings. I almost laughed at that. Contempt of HOA. But I could see she was dead serious, and pushing further would only make things worse. I understand the penalties, I said carefully. Is there anything else? That will be all. Please remit payment within 30 days. I returned to my seat seething. The rest of the meeting dragged on with similar cases. Someone had left their garbage cans visible for too long. Someone else had the wrong shade of beige on their shutters. And another resident had committed the cardinal sin of parking a work van in their driveway overnight. In each case, Sharon and her board handed down fines and threats with the same cold efficiency. When the meeting finally ended at 8:30, I headed for the exit, ready to be done with the whole thing. But a voice stopped me in the parking lot. Hey, wait up. I turned to see a man in his 30s jogging after me. He was wearing a winter coat over business casual clothes with dark hair and tired eyes. Cameron Peters, right? He asked, extending his hand. I'm Jeff Morrison. I live over on Maple Street. I shook his hand. Nice to meet you. I heard what you said in there, about the noise ordinance not making sense for people who work regular hours. You're absolutely right, and Sharon knows it, but she doesn't care. I'm getting that impression. Jeff glanced around, making sure no one else was in earshot. Look, there's something you should know about Sharon and the rest of the board. They've been using the HOA like their personal piggy bank for the last 2 years. All those fines they collect, they're supposed to go toward community improvements and maintenance. But if you actually look at what's being done, it doesn't add up. That got my attention. What do you mean? I'm an accountant. I requested copies of the HOA's financial records last year, which I'm legally entitled to as a homeowner. Took them 3 months and a letter from my lawyer to actually produce them. When I finally got them, the numbers were screwy. They're collecting way more in fines and dues than they're spending on actual community needs, and there are some pretty questionable expenses buried in there. Like what? Sharon has been billing the HOA for travel expenses to go to HOA conferences in Florida and California. The board approved raises for themselves, even though board positions are supposed to be volunteer. And there's a line item for $50,000 for legal consulting that doesn't have any supporting documentation. I felt the familiar tingle that came when a case was starting to develop. That sounds like embezzlement. That's what I thought. But when I raised concerns at a board meeting, Sharon shut me down and accused me of making baseless allegations. Then I started getting violation notices for every tiny thing. My grass was a 1/4 inch too long. My house number wasn't visible enough from the street. My holiday lights were up 3 days past the approved date. In 6 months, they fined me over $2,000. Did you pay? I had to. They put a lien on my house. My wife was pregnant at the time and we couldn't risk losing our home, so I paid and shut up. Jeff's expression was bitter. But I've been documenting everything since then. Every violation notice, every fine, every board decision. And I've been talking to other residents who have been targeted. There are at least 15 of us who think Sharon is running a scam. Have you gone to the police? With what? Questionable accounting and a dictatorial HOA president. The cops told me it was a civil matter. I'd have to sue the HOA, which means suing my own neighborhood association and spending thousands on lawyers with no guarantee of winning. I thought about the violation notice in my pocket and Sharon's threats about confiscating my snowblower. So what are you going to do? I was hoping maybe you could help. You're a federal marshal, right? I heard you mention it at the meeting. I am, but HOA disputes aren't really in my jurisdiction. That's local law enforcement or civil court. Jeff's shoulders slumped. Yeah, I figured, but I thought maybe, I don't know, someone with actual authority might be able to do something. I pulled out my phone. Give me your number. I can't make any promises, but let me look into this. If Sharon and the board are actually embezzling HOA funds, that might cross into criminal territory. And if nothing else, I know some people who might be able to help. Jeff's face brightened. He gave me his contact information, and we talked for another 10 minutes about the specific issues he had documented. The picture he painted was of a systematic pattern of abuse, targeting residents who questioned the board, using fines as punishment rather than correction, and potentially misappropriating tens of thousands of dollars in HOA funds. When I got home, I made myself dinner and then spent the next 3 hours going through the HOA website again, this time with a more critical eye. I downloaded every financial document available, every meeting minute, every policy document. Then I started cross-referencing. Jeff was right. The numbers didn't add up. The HOA was collecting approximately $120,000 per year in regular dues, plus another $60,000 to $80,000 in fines and special assessments. That was close to $200,000 annually. But the expenses for actual community maintenance were minimal. Snow plowing for common areas was contracted out for $15,000 per year. Landscaping was another $20,000. Insurance and utilities for the community center were about $30,000. That left over $100,000 unaccounted for. I found the legal consulting fee Jeff had mentioned. $50,000 paid to Whitmore Legal Consulting. A quick internet search revealed that Whitmore Legal Consulting was owned by Richard Whitmore, Sharon's husband. He was a lawyer specializing in real estate and contract law. The payments to his firm had started 3 years ago and had been increasing annually. That was a clear conflict of interest and potentially illegal self-dealing. Sharon was using her position on the HOA board to funnel money to her husband's company. I kept digging. The travel expenses Jeff mentioned were real. Sharon had attended 4 conferences in the last 18 months, all in resort locations, all with expenses that included first-class airfare, luxury hotels, and meals at expensive restaurants. The total came to over $30,000. Then I found something even more interesting. The board had voted to hire a property management company 2 years ago, right when Sharon became president. The management company was called Premier Community Services, and the HOA was paying them $40,000 per year for services that seemed to mostly consist of processing violation notices and collecting fines. Premier Community Services was registered in Delaware, which made ownership information harder to trace. But the contact address listed on their invoices was the same address as Whitmore Legal Consulting. I sat back from my computer, piecing it together. Sharon had created a scheme where HOA money flowed to companies she and her husband controlled. The aggressive violation notices and fines generated revenue that justified the management company's existence, and the legal consulting fees paid her husband for work that probably wasn't even being done. It was fraud on a significant scale, and it was definitely criminal. The question was what to do about it. Jeff was right that this wasn't technically federal jurisdiction. The U.S. Marshal Service had specific responsibilities: apprehending fugitives, protecting federal courts, transporting federal prisoners, and executing federal warrants. An HOA fraud scheme didn't fall into any of those categories, but I knew people who could help. I pulled out my phone and called a friend from the FBI, Special Agent Marcus Webb, and I had gone through training together at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia. We had stayed in touch over the years, occasionally working together when our jurisdictions overlapped. He was now assigned to the white-collar crime division of the FBI's New Haven field office. "Cameron, it's been too long," Marcus said when he answered. "Tell me you're calling to grab a beer and catch up, not because you need something." "I need something," I admitted. "But I'll buy the beer afterward." Marcus laughed. "Fair enough. What's going on?" I explained the situation, walking him through the financial irregularities I had found and Sharon's pattern of aggressive enforcement and apparent self-dealing. Marcus listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing notes on his computer. "How much money are we talking about total?" he asked when I finished. "Probably $200,000 to $300,000 over the last 3 years. Maybe more if the scheme goes back further than that." "And you've got documentation?" "I've got the HOA's financial records, meeting minutes and contracts with the companies that appear to be connected to the HOA president and her husband, plus a witness who's been documenting the enforcement patterns and has evidence of targeted harassment." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Okay, this might actually be worth looking at. HOA fraud isn't usually our priority, but if we're talking hundreds of thousands in embezzlement and wire fraud, plus potential RICO implications if they're running this as an ongoing criminal enterprise, that could cross the threshold for federal interest. Plus, if they're using the mail or electronic transfers for any of this, that's mail and wire fraud, which is definitely our jurisdiction. So you'll take it. I'll take a preliminary look. Send me everything you've got and I'll review it. If it looks solid, I'll open a case. But Cameron, you need to stay out of it after that. If this goes anywhere, you're a witness and potentially a victim. You can't be investigating your own case." "Understood. I just want these people stopped. They're shaking down the entire neighborhood. Send me the documents. I'll be in touch." I spent the next hour compiling everything into a secure file and emailing it to Marcus's FBI account. Then, I finally allowed myself to relax, feeling like I had done something productive. The next morning, I woke up to find another notice on my door. This one informed me that an inspection of my property had revealed that my mailbox was not in compliance with HOA standards. Apparently, the post was showing signs of rust and needed to be repainted or replaced within 15 days. Failure to comply would result in a fine of $100, with an additional $50 per week until the issue was corrected. I looked at my mailbox. There was a tiny spot of rust near the base, maybe the size of a dime. It was barely visible unless you were specifically looking for it. They were targeting me. Sharon had decided I was a troublemaker, and now she was going to hit me with every violation she could manufacture. I took a photo of the notice and the mailbox, documenting the absurdity of the situation. Then I went to work, trying to put the HOA nonsense out of my mind. But 2 days later, there was another notice. This time, my garbage cans had been visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. Another $100 fine. Never mind that the garbage truck hadn't come until late in the afternoon, and I had brought the cans in as soon as I got home from work. According to the notice, they had been visible at 9 a.m. the day after collection, which violated the covenant. I called Jeff Morrison. She's targeting me now. 3 violation notices in 1 week. Welcome to the club, Jeff said grimly. She did the same thing to me and to everyone else who's questioned her. It's retaliation, plain and simple. Well, I've got some good news. I talked to a friend at the FBI. He's looking into the financial stuff. If he finds what I think he'll find, Sharon and the board might be facing federal charges. Jeff sucked in a breath. Seriously? The FBI, seriously? But it'll take time. Federal investigations move slowly. In the meantime, document everything. Every violation notice, every fine, every interaction with Sharon or the board. Make copies, take photos, keep records. If this goes to trial, we'll need evidence. I can do that, and I'll spread the word to the others. We'll all start documenting. Good, and Jeff, be careful. If Sharon figures out we're building a case against her, she might escalate. What's she going to do, fine me to death? I thought about her threat to confiscate my snowblower. She might try worse than that. The following week brought a massive snowstorm. Connecticut got hit with 14 inches of heavy, wet snow that shut down schools and made roads nearly impassable. I worked from home that day, handling paperwork and case files remotely while the storm raged outside. By evening, the snow had stopped, leaving everything buried under more than a foot of white. I knew I needed to clear my driveway. The forecast called for temperatures to drop overnight, which would turn all that snow into ice. If I didn't deal with it now, I'd be chipping away at frozen concrete for days. But I also knew that using my snowblower would mean violating Sharon's precious noise ordinance again. It was 6 p.m., an hour past the approved time. I could wait until morning, but I had an early warrant service scheduled, and I needed to be able to get my car out of the garage. I decided to call Sharon directly. If I explained the situation and got her permission, maybe I could avoid another violation notice and fine. I found her number on the HOA website and dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. Sharon Whitmore speaking. Hi Sharon, this is Cameron Peters. I wanted to ask about clearing my driveway after the storm. Her voice immediately turned cold. The snow removal noise ordinance is clearly stated in the covenants, Mr. Peters. 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays. I understand that, but I have to leave for work at 7 a.m. tomorrow. If I don't clear my driveway tonight, I won't be able to get out in the morning. I'm requesting an exemption given the circumstances. There are no exemptions. The rule exists for everyone's benefit. Sharon, be reasonable. Half the neighborhood is probably going to be clearing snow tonight. Are you going to fine everyone? I'll fine anyone who violates the covenant. Including you, Mr. Peters. In fact, given your previous violation and your attitude at the board meeting, you're on probationary status. One more violation, and we'll be moving forward with equipment confiscation. I felt anger surge through me. You can't just steal my snowblower. It's not theft. It's covenant enforcement. The rules clearly state that after a 3rd violation, equipment involved in the violation may be confiscated by the HOA and held until all fines are paid in full. You've had one formal violation. The mailbox and garbage issues are pending. If you use that snowblower outside approved hours, that will be your 3rd strike. The mailbox and garbage violations are bogus, and you know it. I know that you seem to believe rules don't apply to you, Mr. Peters. Perhaps actually facing consequences will change that attitude. I suggest you hire a snow removal service or wait until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Good evening. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, trying to decide what to do. My law enforcement training said to document everything and build the case carefully. But my gut said that giving in to Sharon's bullying would only make things worse. I made a decision. I was going to clear my driveway, and if Sharon tried to confiscate my snowblower, she was going to learn that I wasn't as helpless as the other residents she had been pushing around. I put on my heavy coat, boots, and gloves. Then I clipped my federal marshal badge to my belt, making sure it was visible. I also made sure my phone was fully charged and set it to record video before putting it in my coat pocket, lens facing out. The snowblower started on the second pull. I began working my way down the driveway, the machine's engine roaring in the quiet evening. Lights were on in houses up and down the street, and I could see other residents looking out their windows. A few gave me thumbs up. They knew what was happening. I was about halfway through when a white Lexus SUV pulled up to the curb. Sharon climbed out, along with two men I recognized from the HOA board meeting. One was the balding guy with glasses. The other was younger, maybe 40, with the build of someone who spent a lot of time at the gym. I shut off the snowblower and waited. Sharon marched up my driveway, her face red with anger that had nothing to do with the cold. "Mr. Peters, you are in direct violation of HOA Covenant 7-4-C. Shut down that equipment immediately." "I need to clear my driveway to get to work tomorrow," I said calmly. "I called you to request an exemption. You refused." "Because there are no exemptions. The rule applies to everyone." She turned to the two men. "Gerald, Brian, confiscate that snowblower. Mr. Peters has had his 3 strikes." The guy named Gerald hesitated. "Sharon, maybe we should wait and issue another fine first. Confiscating his property seems extreme." "We follow the covenants, Gerald. He's had 3 violations. The snowblower is now HOA property until all fines are paid." Brian, the younger guy, stepped forward. He looked like he was relishing the confrontation. "You heard her. Hand over the snowblower." I didn't move. "You're not taking my property." "We have the legal authority," Sharon snapped. "The covenant gives the HOA the right to confiscate equipment used in violations." "Show me the covenant language," I said. "Specifically, show me where it says you can take my property without due process." Sharon pulled out her phone, scrolling through what I assumed was a digital copy of the covenant. She read aloud. Section 14, subsection C. In cases of repeated violations involving machinery or equipment, the HOA board has the authority to confiscate said equipment until such time as all outstanding fines are paid in full, and the board is satisfied that future violations will not occur. "And what's the definition of repeated violations?" I asked. 3 or more violations within a calendar year." "I've had 1 violation, the snowblower. The mailbox and garbage can notices are pending, not confirmed violations." Sharon's smile was triumphant. "I confirmed them this afternoon." "I sent the notices to your email. Check your phone." I pulled out my phone, making sure the camera was still recording, and checked my email. Sure enough, there were 2 messages from the HOA, both times stamped at 4 p.m. Both confirmed violations with fines attached. "That's 3 strikes, Mr. Peters. Hand over the snowblower, or we'll be forced to call the police and report you for trespassing on HOA-controlled property." That statement was so absurd I almost laughed. Trespassing? This is my property. Actually, according to the covenant, your driveway is considered common area that you have exclusive use of, but the HOA maintains ownership of for enforcement purposes. I had read enough of the covenant to know that was a twisted interpretation at best. But I could also see that Sharon was dead set on pushing this confrontation. She wanted to make an example of me, to show the rest of the neighborhood what happened when you defied the HOA. Time to show her what happened when she pushed too hard. I reached down and unclipped my badge from my belt, holding it up so all three of them could see it clearly in the porch light. I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Cameron Peters. I'm a federal law enforcement officer. And you're attempting to unlawfully seize my property under the false pretense of HOA authority. Sharon barely glanced at the badge. Your employment doesn't exempt you from HOA rules. Actually, it does. Federal law enforcement officers have certain protections against civil harassment and property seizure. It's covered under Title 18, Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights. You're attempting to deprive me of my property rights under color of law, which is a federal felony. That was stretching the statute a bit, but it was close enough to make Sharon hesitate. Gerald, the older board member, was already backing away. He clearly wanted no part of this, but Sharon wasn't backing down. That statute applies to government officials, not private organizations like HOAs. The covenant gives you enforcement authority similar to government power. That makes your actions subject to federal civil rights law. If you attempt to take my snowblower, I will arrest you for attempted theft and violation of federal civil rights statutes. Brian, the younger board member, snorted. You can't arrest us. We're not federal fugitives. I can arrest anyone who commits a federal crime in my presence. That's part of my authority as a U.S. Marshal, and right now you're about 10 seconds away from committing several federal crimes. Sharon's face had gone from red to almost purple. This is ridiculous. We're enforcing legitimate HOA rules. No, you're running an extortion scheme. You've been using the HOA to collect illegal fines and funnel money to companies you and your husband control. I've documented the financial irregularities, and I've referred the case to the FBI. Special Agent Marcus Webb is currently investigating you for wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The color drained from Sharon's face. That's slander. It's truth. And it's about to become very public. Now, I'm going to finish clearing my driveway. You three are going to get back in your car and leave my property. If you attempt to interfere with me again, I will place you under arrest. Do you understand? Gerald was already halfway back to the Lexus. Brian looked uncertain, glancing between me and Sharon. Sharon herself looked like she wanted to argue further, but my badge and the mention of the FBI had clearly rattled her. This isn't over, she finally said. The board will be filing a lawsuit against you for defamation and harassment. You do that. I'm sure the FBI will be very interested in your legal filings. They might even subpoena your lawyers and force them to testify about your financial arrangements. Sharon turned on her heel and stalked back to her car. Brian followed, and Gerald was already in the passenger seat. They drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway with my snowblower and my badge. I waited until they were out of sight. Then I sat down on my front steps. My hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Confrontations like that were part of my job, but usually I had backup and a clear legal authority. This had been a bluff, albeit one based on real concerns about Sharon's actions. I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. I had the whole conversation on video, including Sharon's admission that she had pushed through the violation confirmation specifically to reach 3 strikes. That would be useful evidence of targeted harassment. Then I called Marcus Webb. Please tell me you didn't do something stupid, Marcus said by way of greeting. Define stupid. Cameron. I explained what had just happened. Marcus was silent for a long moment when I finished. You threatened to arrest a homeowner association president, he finally said. I prevented her from illegally seizing my property. There's a difference. That's a pretty fine line. Did you actually have grounds to arrest her? Probably not. But she was attempting to take my snowblower based on manufactured violations. That's extortion at minimum. Marcus sighed. Okay, this is actually good for the investigation. Her actions tonight show consciousness of guilt. She's escalating against you because she knows you're onto her scheme. That's useful evidence. But Cameron, you need to back off now. If she files a complaint against you with your superiors, this could get complicated. Understood. Did you find anything in the financial documents I sent? Oh yeah, this is way bigger than HOA fraud. Sharon Whitmore and her husband have been running this scam in 3 different HOAs across Connecticut. We're talking close to $1 million in embezzlement over 5 years. They set up shell companies, bill the HOAs for fake services, and pocket the money. The aggressive fine structure is designed to generate revenue and scare residents into compliance. It's a textbook racketeering operation. I felt a surge of satisfaction. So you're opening a case. Already opened. I've got approval from my supervisor to proceed with a full investigation. We'll be subpoenaing records, interviewing victims, and building a RICO case. Sharon and Richard Whitmore are looking at serious federal time. How long until you move on them? These things take time. We need to build an airtight case. Probably 3 to 6 months before we're ready to make arrests. In the meantime, keep documenting everything Sharon does. If she keeps targeting you, that's more evidence of obstruction and retaliation. Will do. Thanks, Marcus. Thank you. You handed us a solid case. Just try not to arrest any more HOA board members, okay? I promised I would behave and ended the call. Then I started up the snowblower again and finished clearing my driveway. Several neighbors came out to watch, giving me encouraging waves and thumbs-up gestures. Word was clearly spreading about the confrontation. The next morning, I woke up to find a certified letter taped to my front door. It was from Whitmore Legal Consulting, informing me that the HOA was filing a lawsuit against me for defamation, harassment, and disturbing the peace. They were seeking damages of $50,000 plus legal fees. I took a photo of the letter and texted it to Marcus. His response came back 5 minutes later. Keep it. More evidence. They're trying to intimidate you into silence. Over the next few weeks, Sharon ramped up her campaign against me. I received violation notices for everything imaginable. My doormat was the wrong color, my porch light was too bright. My car was parked 6 inches too far forward in my driveway, and my window blinds were open during unapproved hours. Each notice came with fines ranging from $100 to $500. I documented everything. I took photos, saved emails, and kept detailed records of every interaction. And I spread the word to other residents, connecting the people who had been targeted by Sharon's enforcement scheme. We formed an informal network, sharing information and supporting each other. Jeff Morrison did an incredible job organizing the victims. He created a secure online forum where residents could share their experiences and evidence. Within a month, we had 27 families participating, representing more than a quarter of the neighborhood. The stories were remarkably consistent. Question the board or fall behind on fines, and suddenly you'd be hit with a barrage of violation notices that seemed designed to force you into financial submission. Meanwhile, Marcus and his FBI team were working their investigation. They subpoenaed bank records for Sharon and Richard Whitmore, as well as the shell companies they had created. They interviewed residents from all 3 HOAs where the Whitmores had operated, and they discovered that the fraud went even deeper than initially suspected. It turned out Richard Whitmore had been representing several of the HOAs in legal matters, billing them for thousands of hours of work that was never actually performed. He had also been setting up the shell companies and helping Sharon structure the fraud to avoid detection. He wasn't just a beneficiary of the scheme, he was an active participant and architect. 3 months after my confrontation in the driveway, Marcus called me with an update. "We're getting close. We've got enough evidence to indict. I wanted to give you a heads up that we'll be making arrests within the next 2 weeks. That's great news. There's more. We expanded the investigation and found ties to 2 other couples running similar schemes in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. This appears to be part of a broader network of HOA fraud. We're coordinating with other field offices to take everyone down simultaneously." "How many people are we talking about?" "At least 8 individuals across 4 states. Total losses probably exceed $3 million. This is going to be a major case." I felt a sense of vindication and justice. Sharon had thought she could bully her neighbors with impunity. Instead, she had attracted the attention of federal law enforcement and exposed a massive criminal enterprise. 2 weeks later, at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when I heard vehicles pulling up outside. I looked out the window to see 3 black SUVs with FBI markings parked in front of Sharon's house, 3 doors down from mine. I grabbed my coat and badge and walked down the street, careful to stay out of the way but wanting to witness the moment. Marcus was there, along with 8 other agents. They knocked on Sharon's door, and when she answered in her bathrobe, looking confused and irritated, Marcus held up his badge and a warrant. "Sharon Whitmore, I'm Special Agent Marcus Webb with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Sharon's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, anger, fear, and finally resignation. She tried to argue, but Marcus calmly explained that she could either cooperate now or be taken into custody by force. She chose to cooperate. As agents led her out in handcuffs, she saw me standing at the edge of her lawn. Our eyes met, and I saw pure hatred in her gaze, but I also saw defeat. She knew it was over. Another team of agents had simultaneously arrested Richard Whitmore at his law office downtown. By noon, both were being arraigned in federal court. The news coverage was extensive, with local reporters describing the HOA fraud ring that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from Connecticut homeowners. The other board members who had been helping Sharon were not arrested but were identified as cooperating witnesses. Apparently, Gerald and 2 others had been kept in the dark about the financial fraud and agreed to testify against Sharon in exchange for immunity. The civil lawsuit against me was quietly dropped. The HOA, now under emergency management by the state, issued an apology to all residents who had been targeted with excessive fines. They announced a comprehensive review of all violation notices from the past 3 years and promised refunds to anyone who had been improperly fined. My own fines were canceled, and I received a check for the $250 I had paid for the original Snowblower violation. Several other residents received refunds totaling thousands of dollars. The trial took place 8 months later. I testified about Sharon's harassment campaign and the confrontation in my driveway. Jeff Morrison testified about the financial irregularities he had discovered. Marcus and his team presented overwhelming evidence of the fraud scheme, including bank records, emails, and testimony from dozens of victims. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Sharon Whitmore was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Richard Whitmore got 9 years because of his additional role in structuring the fraud and his abuse of his position as a lawyer. The other participants in the broader network received sentences ranging from 3 to 12 years. The restitution orders totaled over $2 million, though it was unclear how much of that money would actually be recovered. The Whitmores had spent lavishly, buying luxury cars, taking expensive vacations, and remodeling their house. Most of the stolen money was gone. The Maple Ridge HOA underwent significant reforms. A new board was elected, and the covenant documents were revised to eliminate the most onerous provisions. The noise ordinance was changed to allow snow removal equipment until 8 p.m. Fines were reduced and could only be issued after written warnings. And most importantly, the board was required to publish detailed financial records quarterly, with independent audits conducted annually. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The sense of fear and oppression that Sharon had created dissipated. Neighbors started talking to each other again, helping each other out instead of worrying about being reported for violations. I continued my work as a U.S. Marshal, serving warrants and protecting federal courts. But the experience with the HOA had given me a new appreciation for the ways power could be abused even in small, seemingly mundane contexts. Sharon Whitmore hadn't been a violent criminal or a dangerous fugitive. She had been a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and too much authority. And she had caused real harm to dozens of families. One evening about a year after Sharon's arrest, I was clearing snow from my driveway with my trusty snowblower. It was 6:30 p.m., well within the new approved hours. Jeff Morrison walked by with his young son, and he waved to me. "Need any help?" he called out. I shut off the machine. "I'm good, thanks. How's everything going?" "Great. The new board actually listens to residents. It's like living in a normal neighborhood now." He glanced at his son, who was trying to catch snowflakes on his tongue. "I'm glad my kids will grow up here without having to deal with Sharon's nonsense." "Me too." Jeff started to walk away, then turned back. "Hey, Cameron, thanks for standing up to her. A lot of us wanted to, but we didn't know how. You showed us it was possible." "We all stood up to her together," I said. "I just happened to have a badge and a friend at the FBI." Jeff smiled and continued his walk, his son running ahead of him through the snow. I watched them go, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, the bully had been stopped, and a neighborhood had been freed from a petty tyrant's control. I finished clearing my driveway and went inside to warm up. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Drinks this weekend, I'm buying." I texted back, "You're always buying." "But sure," Marcus responded. "You handed me a career case. I can afford to buy you a few beers. Besides, I've got another situation I want to run by you. Another HOA, different town, same kind of pattern." I stared at my phone, debating whether I wanted to get involved in another HOA investigation. Part of me wanted to stay far away from homeowner association drama. But another part of me remembered the relief on Jeff's face and the faces of all the other residents who had been freed from Sharon's harassment. I texted back, "Tell me more." The work of justice was never finished. There would always be people who abused power, who bullied their neighbors, who thought rules existed to enrich themselves rather than serve the community. But there would also be people willing to stand up to them, to document their crimes, and to ensure they faced consequences. As I settled onto my couch with a hot cup of coffee, I thought about my snowblower sitting safely in my garage. No one was going to confiscate it. No one was going to fine me for using it at reasonable hours. And if anyone tried, well, I still had my badge, I still had my connections, and I still had a strong sense of what was right and what was wrong. Sharon Whitmore had learned a hard lesson about the limits of authority and the consequences of abuse. And I had learned that sometimes the most important law enforcement work happened not in dramatic fugitive chases or courtroom showdowns, but in standing up to petty tyrants in your own neighborhood. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing everything in white. But inside my home I was warm, safe, and satisfied. Justice had been served. The community had been protected. And I had my snowblower. Sometimes that's all that really mattered. Several months passed, and spring arrived in Connecticut with its usual mix of rain, mud, and gradually warming temperatures. The neighborhood transformed from the stark white winter landscape into shades of green and brown. Flowers started blooming in yards up and down the street, and people emerged from their homes to enjoy the better weather. The new HOA board held its first annual meeting in April, and the attendance was remarkable. Nearly every homeowner in Maple Ridge showed up, curious to see how the reformed organization would operate. The meeting was held at the community center, but unlike the intimidating setup Sharon had used, this one featured a circle of chairs with the board members sitting among the residents rather than elevated at a separate table. The new president was a retired teacher named Margaret Chen who lived 2 streets over from me. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and a warm smile. She opened the meeting by acknowledging the difficult year the community had endured. "We all know what happened with the previous board," Margaret said. "The fraud, the harassment, the abuse of power. That's behind us now. This board's mission is simple: maintain our common areas, protect property values, and create a community where people actually want to live. We're here to serve you, not rule over you." There was applause at that. I sat in the back, observing and feeling cautiously optimistic. The financial report was presented with complete transparency. Every expense was itemized and explained. The HOA had recovered about $40,000 from the Whitmore's seized assets, which had been used to repair neglected common areas and build up the reserve fund. Dues were being reduced by 15% for the coming year since the inflated budget Sharon had created was no longer necessary. When the floor opened for questions, several residents asked about specific covenant provisions that had been used to harass them. Margaret had prepared for this. She announced that a covenant revision committee had been formed and was working on a comprehensive update to eliminate problematic rules and streamline the document. "We're going from 70 pages to about 20, she said. "We're keeping the important stuff about maintaining property values and community standards, but we're getting rid of the ridiculous nitpicking. No more fines for mailbox rust or garbage cans being visible for a few extra hours. We're going to treat each other like reasonable adults." More applause. Jeff Morrison raised his hand and was recognized. "I want to thank Cameron Peters publicly for having the courage to stand up to Sharon Whitmore. Without him, a lot of us would still be living in fear." Heads turned toward me and I felt my face flush. I hadn't expected public recognition and wasn't entirely comfortable with it. But people started clapping, and a few residents called out thanks. I nodded in acknowledgement, appreciating the sentiment even if I didn't entirely feel I deserved special credit. The meeting continued for another hour, covering routine business and future planning. There was talk of organizing community events: a summer barbecue, a fall festival, maybe a holiday lights competition. The atmosphere was completely different from the tense, fearful meetings Sharon had presided over. People were engaged and optimistic. After the meeting ended, several residents approached me to share their stories. A woman named Patricia told me she had been fined over $3,000 for various violations, which had nearly forced her to sell her home. She had received a full refund and was considering a lawsuit against Sharon and Richard personally to recover her legal costs. An elderly man named Harold shook my hand vigorously. "I'm a veteran," he said. "Served in Vietnam. I thought I understood bullies and tyrants, but Sharon was something else. She had no shame. Thank you for stopping her." These conversations reinforced for me that what had happened in Maple Ridge wasn't just about money or rules. It was about dignity and respect. Sharon had made people feel powerless in their own homes. She had created an environment of fear and suspicion. The damage she had caused went beyond the financial fraud. As I walked home that evening, I reflected on how the entire situation had unfolded. It had started with such a small thing, clearing my driveway at the wrong time. But that minor violation had exposed a massive criminal enterprise. It made me think about all the other small injustices that might be happening in communities across the country, where people with a little authority abused it for personal gain. My phone rang. It was Marcus Webb. "Hey, I saw the news story about the HOA meeting," he said. "Looks like things are getting back to normal in your neighborhood." "Yeah, it's a huge improvement. Margaret Chen is doing a great job as the new president." "Good. Listen, remember I mentioned another potential HOA fraud case? I've been looking into it, and it's not as clear-cut as the Whitmore situation. The financial records are cleaner, but there's definitely some suspicious activity. Would you be willing to talk to a few residents and get their perspective? Off the record, just to help me understand if there's really something there." I hesitated. The Whitmore investigation had consumed a lot of my time and emotional energy. I wasn't eager to dive into another HOA mess. But I also knew that if there were people being victimized the way Maple Ridge residents had been, someone needed to help them. "Where is this?" I asked. "Brantford. About 30 minutes from you. The HOA president is a guy named Dennis Keller. He's been in charge for 6 years, and several residents have complained about financial irregularities and aggressive enforcement. It might be nothing, or it might be Whitmore 2.0. Send me the information. I'll talk to the residents and see what I can find out. Thanks, Cameron. I owe you." "You owe me several beers at this point," Marcus laughed. "Fair enough." Over the next few weeks, I made contact with 3 residents from the Brantford HOA who had raised concerns about Dennis Keller. Their stories were familiar: unexplained fines, aggressive enforcement of minor violations, and financial reports that didn't quite add up. But as I dug deeper, I started to see some differences from the Whitmore case. Dennis Keller wasn't running a sophisticated fraud scheme. He was just incompetent and power-hungry. The financial irregularities seemed to stem from poor record-keeping and legitimate expenses that had been poorly documented. The aggressive enforcement was problematic but not criminal. He was a bad HOA president, but not necessarily a criminal. I reported my findings to Marcus, who agreed that it probably didn't warrant a federal investigation. However, I connected the Brantford residents with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, and they ended up forcing a special election that removed Keller from the board. Problem solved through local action rather than federal intervention. Summer arrived, and I found myself genuinely enjoying my neighborhood for the first time since I had moved in. The community barbecue Margaret had proposed actually happened, with residents gathering at the community center for burgers, hot dogs, and conversation. Kids ran around playing while adults socialized. It was the kind of normal neighborhood activity that should have been happening all along, but had been impossible under Sharon's regime. I met Catherine Torres at that barbecue. She was new to the neighborhood, having just moved into a house on Elm Street. She was a pediatrician at Yale New Haven Hospital, recently relocated from Boston. We started talking, discovered we had a lot in common and exchanged phone numbers. Life was good. Work was steady, the neighborhood was peaceful, and I was dating someone I actually liked. The HOA drama seemed like ancient history. Then, in late July, I got a call from a prosecutor at the Connecticut State Attorney's Office. Her name was Lisa Richmond, and she was calling about a civil case related to the Whitmore convictions. Mr. Peters, several victims of the Whitmore fraud scheme are pursuing civil litigation to recover additional damages beyond the criminal restitution. Your testimony would be very helpful in establishing the pattern of harassment and abuse. I thought the criminal case covered all of that, I said. It covered the financial fraud, but the civil suit is addressing emotional distress, loss of property value, and other damages that weren't part of the criminal proceeding. Some residents are seeking significant compensation for what they went through. I agreed to testify if needed, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. I had testified at the criminal trial and had no desire to spend more time in courtrooms discussing Sharon Whitmore. The civil case moved forward slowly, as civil cases tend to do. In the meantime, life in Maple Ridge continued to improve. The covenant revisions were completed and approved by a vote of the membership. The new document was 23 pages instead of 70, written in plain English instead of legalese, and focused on reasonable community standards rather than petty control. The noise ordinance now allowed snowblowers and other equipment until 8 p.m. Fines were capped at $100 maximum and could only be issued after 2 written warnings. The board's financial records were published online quarterly, and most importantly, any board member found to have a conflict of interest in HOA business would be immediately removed. Catherine and I grew closer over the summer. She appreciated that I had stood up to Sharon, though she found the whole story almost unbelievable. An HOA president stealing money and threatening to confiscate snowblowers. She said one evening as we sat on my back deck, "It sounds like something from a bad TV movie. I know, but it was real, and it was terrifying for a lot of people. What made you decide to fight back instead of just paying the fines?" I thought about that. Honestly, it just felt wrong. I've spent my career enforcing the law and protecting people from those who abuse power. I couldn't just roll over when someone tried to bully me in my own neighborhood. It would have felt like a betrayal of everything I believe in. Catherine smiled. "That's why I like you. You have principles, and you actually live by them." In September, the civil case went to trial. I testified for about 2 hours, describing Sharon's harassment campaign and the confrontation in my driveway. The defense attorneys tried to portray the HOA enforcement as legitimate and Sharon as simply doing her job, but the jury wasn't buying it. The financial fraud conviction made it clear that Sharon's motives had been corrupt, and the testimony from dozens of residents painted a picture of systematic abuse. The jury awarded the plaintiffs, a group of 15 residents who had been most severely targeted, a total of $750,000 in damages. Sharon and Richard Whitmore were ordered to pay jointly, though everyone knew they had no assets left. The judgment would likely never be fully collected, but it served as a symbolic vindication for the victims. After the civil trial concluded, I felt like I could finally close the chapter on the HOA saga. Sharon was in federal prison. Richard was in prison. The neighborhood had reformed and justice had been served both criminally and civilly. It was over, or so I thought. In November, I received a letter forwarded from the U.S. Marshal's Service. It had originally been sent to Sharon Whitmore at her federal prison in West Virginia, but she had refused to accept it and written "Return to sender" on the envelope. The prison had forwarded it to the prosecutor's office, who had sent it to the Marshal's service, who had given it to me. Inside was a handwritten letter from Sharon. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages of self-justifying rambling. Sharon insisted she had done nothing wrong, that she had been trying to maintain community standards, and that I had ruined her life by weaponizing law enforcement against her. She claimed she was the real victim, that the FBI investigation had been excessive, and that the charges against her had been exaggerated. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the harm she had caused, no recognition that she had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was all deflection and blame. The letter ended with a threat. When I get out of prison, I will dedicate my life to exposing you and the corrupt system that wrongly convicted me. You haven't won. This isn't over. I read it twice, then filed it away. Empty threats from a convicted felon serving 7 years weren't particularly concerning. By the time Sharon got out of prison, I would have moved on with my life, and she would be a middle-aged woman with a federal conviction trying to rebuild in obscurity. I mentioned the letter to Marcus, who found it darkly amusing. "Narcissists never think they're wrong," he said. "Sharon genuinely believes she was in the right. That's why she was so dangerous. She had no internal brake telling her to stop. Should I be worried about the threat? Nah. Once she's out, she'll be on supervised release and won't be able to do anything without her probation officer knowing. And honestly, most people like Sharon lose their fire after a few years in prison. She'll probably just want to live quietly and avoid attention." I hoped he was right. Winter came again, bringing more snow. I cleared my driveway with my trusty snowblower at 7 p.m. on a weekday, well within the approved hours, and nobody said a word. It was such a simple thing, but it represented the larger victory, the freedom to take care of my property without fear of harassment. Catherine and I spent the holidays together. She met my family, I met hers, and we started making long-term plans. By March, we were talking seriously about moving in together, maybe buying a house in a different neighborhood. Not because there was anything wrong with Maple Ridge anymore, but because we wanted to start fresh in a place that was ours together. On a warm day in early April, almost 2 years after my first encounter with Sharon Whitmore, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee and reflected on everything that had happened. The HOA nightmare had been stressful and time-consuming, but it had also brought the community together in unexpected ways. Neighbors who had been afraid to talk to each other had formed genuine friendships. The experience had taught everyone the importance of vigilance and civic participation. Jeff Morrison walked by with his son, who was now riding a bicycle. Jeff waved and called out, "Beautiful day." "Sure is," I replied. "Hey, the new board is talking about putting in a playground at the community center. They want resident input. You should come to the meeting next week." "I'll be there." That was the other legacy of the Sharon Whitmore affair. People were engaged now. They showed up to meetings, they asked questions, they held their elected representatives accountable. The neighborhood was truly a community in a way it hadn't been before. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Catherine. "Dinner tonight, my place or yours?" I texted back. "Yours, I'll bring wine." As I got up to head inside and get ready for work, I glanced down the street toward Sharon's old house. A new family had moved in, a young couple with a toddler. They were good neighbors, friendly and considerate. The house no longer carried the weight of its previous owner's misdeeds. I thought about Sharon in her prison cell, probably still convinced she had been wronged, still refusing to accept responsibility for what she had done. I wondered if she would ever understand the damage she had caused, the fear she had created, the trust she had betrayed. Probably not. Some people never learned, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I had done my part. I had stood up to a bully, helped expose a criminal enterprise, and contributed to making my neighborhood a better place. That was enough. I drove to work, ready to focus on my actual job, serving warrants, protecting courts, and maintaining federal law enforcement. The HOA drama was finally, truly over, or at least I hoped it was. Life had a way of surprising you, and I had learned that even the smallest conflicts could spiral into major cases. But for now, I was content. Justice had been served. The community had healed. And my snowblower sat safely in my garage, ready for the next winter's snow. Sometimes, standing up for what was right meant facing down armed fugitives. Sometimes, it meant confronting a petty tyrant with a clipboard. The principle was the same: refusing to let bullies win, regardless of the form their bullying took. As I pulled into the parking garage at the federal courthouse, I smiled to myself. Sharon Whitmore had tried to seize my snowblower for being too loud. She had frozen when she saw my federal marshal badge. And in the end, justice had prevailed. That was a story worth remembering, and a reminder that authority without accountability was just tyranny in disguise. Whether it came from a government or a homeowners association, abuse of power needed to be challenged and stopped. I grabbed my briefcase and headed into the courthouse, ready for whatever the day would bring. The snowblower saga was behind me, but the work of justice continued. And I was exactly where I needed to be.